Hey guys, this is Casey Ferris. Thanks for checking out another video of mine here on YouTube. I have been getting a ton of people asking me, is now the time to switch from Premiere or Final Cut or whatever NLE you're using to DaVinci Resolve? So for the next few weeks, we're going to be doing a series of videos that takes you deeper into the most essential aspects of using DaVinci Resolve. And these are kind of common, need to get it done, basic stuff that you'll find yourself doing on just about any video project. So I hope you guys enjoy this series. I'm really excited to share it with you. Today, we are going to be looking at some basic editing inside of DaVinci Resolve. This video is perfect for anybody who has used Premiere before and is thinking about switching over to Resolve. We'll go over the basics of the interface as well as importing clips, organizing media, moving stuff around on the timeline, and we'll be going over all the essential things for actually making something, which is the point of it all anyway. So let's jump into Resolve. So once you open Resolve, it should look something like this. This little window right here is called your project manager. That's where you make new projects, open old ones, that kind of thing. I'll go ahead and hit new project and call it something interesting like edit. And here we are in the edit page. The very first thing that we need to do is import some media so we can actually start building our video. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. One of the easiest ways is to open up a Explorer or a Finder window, grab the media that you want, and just drag it over here into this left panel, which is called your media pool. This panel is really important because that's where everything in your project lives. All of your imported media, when you create a timeline, if you create graphics or import music or anything, all of it lives here inside of the media pool. It's kind of like a big bucket where you throw all your ingredients before you make cookies. You know, a cookie bucket. Everybody has one of those. So now I have my media in my project. Another way that I can import media is go up to File, Import Media, and I can grab something like music and hit open. And that will import into my media pool. Now, nobody's going to see any of this because none of this is added to a timeline. It's just kind of hanging out in our project. So we need to make a timeline. Easiest way to do that, right click here in the media pool, go to timelines and hit create new timeline. Now we have this thing that pops up and it asks us all kinds of things about our timeline. All of these settings are fine for pretty much most projects. I'm going to hit create and now things change a little bit. Both of our viewers go black and we have our timeline icon right here in the media pool. So now we have a timeline made and we can add media here and move it around in time and actually build our video. There are a bunch of ways that we can do this. I can just grab one of my clips from the media pool and drag it down to my timeline. That would work just fine. I could also double click a clip and bring it up here in my source viewer, which is right here. I can scrub through my footage and decide if I like it or not before I import it into my timeline. I can also select just a part of this. Like let's say I want to start right here when the camera focuses on her. I'll set an endpoint by clicking this button right here. That's going to be the very start of my selection. And then I can move over here. Let's say we want it to end, I don't know, around there. And I'll click this mark out button to tell it where I want the selection to end. So now we have just a part of this clip selected. If I drag this down to the timeline, we can see we just have that part of the clip. This is probably a good time to talk about the viewers. This viewer on the left is pretty much kind of like your work area. You can open up a clip and work with it, set ins and outs, preview it, that kind of thing. The viewer on the right is for the timeline, and that shows what's actually happening down here. We'll see if I go back here to the start and hit play, that stuff is playing on the right because this is the timeline viewer. This is what the person who watches your project is actually going to see. So there's a couple different ways to add media to the timeline. Another really slick way, if I click and drag this clip in this viewer and drag it over here to the right on my timeline viewer, I have a bunch of different options here. You can play around with these yourself and figure out what they do, but each one throws the clip into the timeline in a different way. One that I use a lot is place on top. And if I do that, look what happens. It just throws that clip on top of the clips that are already in the timeline. And again, I could accomplish the same thing just by dragging this down from the source viewer. That's another way to do it. It doesn't really matter what you use. It's more of a preference thing. There's a couple ways to get clips into the timeline. Once they're actually there, what do you do with them? If we look right here in the middle of our screen, we have a bunch of different icons on this toolbar. And these left two icons are pretty important because that's your selection mode. The one on the left is your normal tool, and that works like this. I can grab a clip in the timeline just by clicking and dragging. I can move it back and forth. If I mouse over the end of a clip, you can see it turns into a little bracket thing with arrows, and that lets me trim the end of the clip on the beginning and the end. And if I have two clips right next to each other like this, and I put this in between, you can see I have two brackets, and that will roll that edit left and right. This is great for finding an exact moment where you want to cut. You'll also notice these little white markers at the end of each clip. If I mouse over this and it turns to just two left and right arrows, I can move this marker in, and what that will do is add a fade to my clip. So I can have this fade up, and I don't have to keyframe anything or add a transition or an effect. I can just adjust that within the clip. Sync these down here. Now in my normal selection mode, if I were to grab the side of this clip and roll it to the right, we'll see we leave a gap there. That's bad because there's not going to be any video there. So what I'm going to have to do is move these down to close that gap. I can do that a few different ways. One way is I can just select this empty space and hit backspace on my keyboard, and that will shift everything down. Another way is select it, right click and say ripple delete. But let me show you something cool with the trim edit mode. I'm going to roll this back to where it was, and I'm going to go up here and select trim edit mode. Now this will do similar things to our normal selection mode, but you'll see our icon is different. And if I were to grab the end of this, you can see it moves everything down. And so it tries not to have a gap. So if you know what you're doing and you're aware of this, you can actually edit things pretty quickly and trim them without making gaps. That's a really nice way to work. We also have a slip mode, which if you were to just mouse over pretty much any part of the thumbnail and click and drag, this is keeping the same in and out point on the timeline, but moving the section of the clip around. So if you have 2 seconds here, you can use 2 seconds from later in the clip. There's also slide, which is kind of the opposite of that. If you mouse over the very bottom of a clip and move it to the left and right in trim mode, it will move it around in the timeline, but keep the same in and out for the clip. So that's just a few different tips for moving things around in the timeline. And again, none of this is the right way or wrong way to do it. It's just a bunch of different ways that you can do the same thing. But you don't always just move clips back and forth or trim the start and end of them. Sometimes you might just want to split a clip. Here's how you do it. If I want to split a clip, I can go up here to my toolbar, and the fourth icon to the right is called the blade edit mode. I'm going to select that, and I can mouse over any clip, and I can just click where I want that clip to be split. Then if I switch back to selection mode, I can grab either piece of this clip and move it around in the timeline. If I want to split a clip right where the playhead is, I can just put my playhead where I want and then hit Control \, and that will split the clip the same way. That's a really nice way to make a very quick cut. So I'm going to delete everything from my timeline, and let's make a little edit. I'll go up to my media pool, and this slider right here, I'm just going to move to the right so that we can see thumbnails a little bit bigger. And I think one thing I'm going to do is organize this just a little bit. We don't have a ton of media in this project, but I know if you have a bigger project, you're going to want to organize it. Great way to do that is with bins. So I'm going to right click anywhere in the media pool, go down about a third where it says add bin, and I'm going to click that. Now it's time to panic because everything is gone. And you're like, what did I do? It's no problem. All it's done is create a new folder and then open that empty folder in this window. And you'll see over here, we have this listed as bin 1. I can rename this as, I don't know, music, because this is where I'm going to put my music. And you'll see it's selected with this kind of dark shading. If I go up to where it says master, I can switch back and everything's okay again. And here I have a folder where I can throw, surprise, my music. So that's how you make a bin. You can make as many bins as you want, but what I'm doing is building an edit. So I think this might be a good ending shot. I'm going to double click this to load it up here in the source viewer, and I'll scrub through it. And let's start here when she looks at the camera. I'll hit my mark in and go over here to something like that and hit mark out. And I'll just drag this over to my timeline viewer and hit overwrite. You could really drag this on just about any of these selections when you don't have anything in your timeline, and it'll work. Now let's take a look at our next clip. We have her taking a picture. I think I'm going to start it maybe right there, but instead of going all the way over here to this button, I'm just going to hit I on my keyboard, and that's going to set my endpoint, and I'll scroll down to where I like it, and I'll hit O for an out point. That's made a selection of this clip. I'll just drag it down to my timeline this time. This seems like this could go right before that taking a picture, and we'll start it right here. I for in, and O for out. And since I want this to go before that clip that I just added, this one right here, what I can do is move my playhead in between these two clips, and I can add this using the insert option. So I'm going to grab this video, drag it over here, and select insert. And look what this did in the timeline. I can zoom in and out on my timeline by hitting Control+. Now we see we have this first clip of her overlooking the city right before her taking a picture. Let's take a look at how this edit looks. Standing, standing. Gonna take a picture. Camera to the eye. That's exactly what we needed. Perfect. Let's take a look at another clip. Now she's just thinking about how good that picture was. Hit I for in, O for out. I'll drag my timeline back to the middle just to show you something. I'll grab the video and drag it to the right again, but this time I'm going to select append at end. Now watch what happens when I do this. It adds the clip to the very end of the timeline. This is great if you're building stuff that's kind of in order, because you can just hit append at end on every clip once you decide which parts you want to use in append at end. Then you don't have to worry about where your playhead is. It just adds it to the end of the timeline. So here we have our basic edit. It's looking good, but let's say this first clip is just a little bit too long. I'm gonna go up here and select the trim edit mode and come over here to the left side of that first clip and just click and drag it to the right. And what that's doing is trimming the front of this clip and also bringing all the rest of the clips with it so we don't have a gap there. All right, so there's our little edit. A couple more things I want to show you before we go is how to add effects and how to adjust properties. Effects are like filters, transitions, things that you would add to a shot to spice it up a little bit. And properties are the controls for the effects or even the clip itself. If I go up to the upper left, right above my media pool, I have a button called Effects Library. If I click that, that opens a window toward the bottom, surprisingly called my Effects Library. This is where we have a whole host of different tools, filters that we can add to shots, transitions, and all kinds of goodies. Transitions work pretty much how you would expect. You can just grab whatever transition you want out of the effects library and just drag it in between two clips, and that will add the transition. You can adjust the length of the transition by mousing over the edges of it and dragging it to set the duration. Effects work the same way. If I go in this list to the left in my effects library, go down to Open Effects, you'll see we have a whole bunch of different effects that we can add to things. If you have the paid version of Resolve, you have a few more available to you, but the free version has a bunch as well. So I'll just grab something like a radial blur and just drag it onto whatever clip I want to add that effect to. Put my playhead over the clip. Now we can see in our timeline viewer that it's doing stuff. But how do we change what it's doing? In the upper right, you'll find a button called Inspector. If you click that, that'll open up the Inspector panel. Shocking. And the inspector is all about changing properties and controls for pretty much anything that's going on in the timeline. And it depends on what is selected. Right now we have the controls for our transition because we have our transition selected down here in the timeline. If I select my clip and go back up to the inspector, you'll see we have a whole bunch more controls. And there's two little pages here in the inspector. The first is video, and that has everything to do with the actual clip. So that's like transforming the clip, rotating it, all of those properties that would be built into a clip on the timeline. And you can just click this little circle arrow to reset anything you mess up. To the right of where it says video here, you'll see something called Open Effects. This is only going to appear if you have an effect on your clip, which we do. So I'm gonna click that, and here we have our controls for our radial blur. So we can adjust all the different things about our blur, how strong it is, and everything to tune it just how we like. And it doesn't really matter what kind of effect that you have going on in the timeline. Pretty much universally in Resolve, anytime that you want to adjust the properties of something, change how something looks or how it's being affected, you go to the inspector. And remember, it's based on whatever is selected. So if you want to adjust this clip, you select it in the timeline and go up to the inspector and you can adjust it. So that's the basics of how to add things to the timeline, move them around. But so far, we've only worked with video clips. The good news is that audio clips work basically the same way. If I go up to my media pool, double click on my music bin, I see my music here, and I can double click to open it inside of the source viewer. And up here, I can see the whole clip, and I can move my little preview window around. That makes it really easy to select the part of the music that I really like. And just like with video clips, I can hit I for in, and O for out. And I can drag this onto my timeline viewer to add it to the timeline, and I'll just hit overwrite. And what that'll do is just add it to my timeline, and I can move it around using the same controls. If I want to adjust any of the properties of this audio clip, I of course go up to the inspector, and I can lower my volume, adjust my pan, pitch. I even have a built-in EQ. And again, working with audio clips works the same way. I can cut them with a razor, trim things using the trim tool, and it's the exact same way of working as with the video. So we pretty much learned the basics on how editing works inside of Resolve. It's not really a whole lot different than any other editor. If you're familiar with Premiere or Final Cut or Vegas or anything like that, or even something like iMovie, once you learn a little bit about the layout, things should make a lot of sense. But now that we have a project, we want to make sure that people can actually see it, right? And for people to see the video that you made inside of Resolve, you have to render it. Everything that we've been doing inside of Resolve in this video has been happening in the Edit page. If you look down in the lower center here of Resolve, there's 6 buttons. And each of these buttons has to do with what page is brought up in Resolve. We're going to do videos on the other pages and talk about them quite a bit. But when it comes to rendering your project, the first thing that you have to do is go to the Deliver page just by clicking Deliver. And once you do, it's going to switch the entire interface over to the Deliver page. This is something that might kind of look scary, but the good news is you only really need to pay attention to like 2 things here. The first is the render settings over to the left. These are all of the properties of the actual video that you are going to render out of Resolve. And it's really easy because there's a bunch of presets up here. If you're going to export a video to YouTube, you can just click this YouTube button and it will set all of the settings to recommended values for exporting your project to YouTube. And you can go in and tweak them to your heart's content. I'm not going to get into how to do all of that right now, but here's where you set all of your settings for export. There's video settings. If you twirl this down, there's some more advanced video settings. And over here where it says video audio file, if you click on audio, there's your properties for the audio tracks. And then if you click on file, this is where you name your project and can do some pretty advanced kind of naming things. But basically you set your settings and you set your location for your render. I'll just select my desktop because it's easy. And once that's all set, click this button right here that says Add to Render Queue. Now, don't walk away thinking it's rendering because it's not. All it does is decide that it's going to render using these settings to this file, and now it's going to wait for you to tell it to go. If we look over here, on the right side of our interface, we have the render queue. This is just a list of all of the different things that you are going to render. Right now, we just have one, but if we go back, we could, let's say, make it H.264 master. Maybe we want to export just audio. Maybe we want to export some kind of high quality thing, maybe like a Cineform, add to render queue. And if we look over to the right, we see all of these settings have been added as jobs inside of the render queue. And once we're ready to go, ready to render, just hit Start Render. Then Resolve is going to go through your whole video and render it out so people can actually watch it. So there you go. There's the basics of editing inside of DaVinci Resolve. Hopefully not too hard. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. If you like this video, hit like. And for more post-production tutorials, videos on DaVinci Resolve, things like that, make sure to subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. My name again is Casey Ferris. I will catch you next time.